Hello, this is Richard Thornton. Welcome back to the People of One Fire series on the ancient civilizations of Mexico. They're based on the 4 trips I made to Mexico during the late 20th century, primarily from the first trip where I was a recipient of the first Barrett Fellowship and took over 2,500 slides and several hundred photographs of the ruins you see in Mexico that's gone with the wind in this series. Many of the sites now are overdeveloped. Part 1 of the programs will focus on the Maya and pre-Maya sites near the coast of Campeche, and also some scenery along the way, along the coastline, and as we penetrate into the interior. The Campeche programs are different than any of the others that have been produced for Mexico, because instead of taking a bus to that particular part of Mexico and then smaller buses out to the boonies, I actually had a Jeep and a guide with me throughout the entire state. Oh, and did I mention she was beautiful? Yes, this is also going to be very different because it is a love story. A totally unexpected love in the jungles of Mexico. My tour guide eventually became a highly respected anthropologist in Mexico and contributed much to the understanding of Mayan music and dancing today that you see on YouTube. My first of 4 trips to Mexico was made possible by a grant from Georgia Tech. This was the first Barrett Fellowship granted by the Georgia Tech School of Architecture. In current funds, it would be equal to around $7,000 today. Plus, I received the equivalent of maybe $500 to $700 in assistance from the government of Mexico and the Atlanta Archaeological Society. It was an incredible opportunity. It enabled me to spend the entire summer in Mexico and see virtually all the major archaeological sites in Mexico and what was accessible in Guatemala. The Barrett Fellowship still exists today at Georgia Tech, but now it's more of a stipend that gives a small amount of money to students studying abroad, whereas in my case it was intended to be a full grant to cover achievement of a graduate degree. I basically did everything that would be required for a master's, including a thesis. The grant was made possible by an endowment from architect Sid Barrett, who had a major effect on the skyline of Atlanta during the mid and late 20th century. He obtained his master's degree from Georgia Tech and was active in civic activities. He's no longer with us, but he's still having a major impact on architecture students today. Once in Mexico, I was an official guest of the Department of Foreign Relations Cultural Relations Division. This was made possible because the consul from Mexico in Atlanta happened to be an architect and a graduate of Georgia Tech. This created many, many opportunities for me, and I was basically treated as a VIP the whole time I was there. I was based at the Museo Nacional de Antropología near Chapultepec Park. My fellowship coordinator initially were two men, Ramon Pinachan and Ignacio Bernal, but I never saw Ignacio after our first meeting, whereas I became good friends with Ramon Pinachan. As I said, he was from Campeche, he was half Maya, and I was part Creek Indian, so we had some common backgrounds that made us become good friends. However, Ramon did not like the syllabus created by my Georgia Tech professors I mentioned earlier. He felt, well, let's just say he asked me, what do you want to be, a turista, or do you want to learn about the ancient heritage of Mexico and learn how to restore buildings? And my answer was the latter, and therefore he tossed my syllabus into the trash can and told me to come back the next day, and that his graduate assistant Alejandra would give me my new travel plans. The biggest change to the syllabus, in fact, was an addition of an entire week in Campeche, which changed into 10 days because I found romance there and extended my stay to be with Anna. You'll learn about that later. Alejandra's a very sharp young lady, except she had never been in Campeche. She was not familiar with the roads or the facilities there for getting tourists to these new archaeological sites that are opening up. And that's where we were going to run into problems, but I didn't know that at the time. You see, Alejandra assumed that if a road was marked as a state highway or a federal highway, it was a decent paved two-lane road. But what we were going to run into, even in addition to not having bus service, was that these turned out to be dirt trails. They were state highways, but they were a little more than a Jeep trail. I took a first-class bus from Merida southward to Campeche City. As you can see in these images, the road wasn't bad at all. It was a federal highway and even had a lane on the side for bicycles and, I guess, horses. That was not the problem. So I thought everything was going to go well until I checked into my hotel. Campeche City didn't even have the equivalent of a Chamber of Commerce or Visitor Center. The only thing close enough to it is the museum where there were people who knew something about what was going on. The hotel was beautiful, though. It wasn't like I was going to be suffering while staying in Campeche City. I headed on over to the City Hall, or Palacio Municipal, where there was a small museum, hoping they would tell me how to get to these ruins. They told me, though, that all the package bus tours for tourists were based in Merida, not in Campeche City, and they really weren't designed for my needs, where I had to spend hours at each site. They would take the tourists by maybe for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, or maybe even a drive-by at a place I needed to spend several hours. That just was not going to work for me. City Hall, who spoke English better, suggested that I go to a Senor Rojas, who had an office nearby. He specialized in outfitting archaeological expeditions into eastern Campeche, and maybe he had a way of getting me to these sites. So then I started hoofing it to Mr. Rojas's office. Senor Rojas was a very nice gentleman. Now he was perfectly fluent in English. Of course, he had a slight accent, but probably spoke English about almost any person I'd met in Mexico so far. He explained that he did work with several major universities mainly in the southeast, and put together their expeditions. He would provide the laborers, the tents, the food, the transportation, all logistics, so that all the students and the archaeologists had to do is show up and do their thing and leave. And he'd done quite well at it, I could tell that. He suggested to me that I take a city bus out to an archaeological site near the ocean where some very interesting ruins have been discovered, including a stela that seemed to portray a visitor from the eastern Mediterranean. He had a Semitic cap and a lantern anchor. And then he said, come back to my office when you're finished and we'll go out to my home. You can have dinner with my family. And he just planned to spend the evening with us. Uyamil was a Chantal Maya port on the Gulf Coast of Campeche. The only problem is nobody, whether the Museum in Mexico City nor at Georgia Tech, ever mentioned the Chantal Mayas with me. As it turned out, they're extremely important to understanding the cultural development of the Creek Indians. But again, they were never mentioned to me. This engraved volcanic boulder is located near the confluence of the Chattahoochee River and the Soke River in Habersham County in northeast Georgia. It's a very similar style to the rock scene in Campeche. This is one of the reasons why we need to study the Chantal Mayas more closely. He was ready to leave as soon as I got back from the ruins, and we left immediately and went to his house. It was spectacular. It was a hacienda, not the size like 100 acres, but I'd say maybe in English measuring system they might have 8 acres. But it was a beautiful house with in the back with gardens and all manner of fruit trees, particularly citrus trees. He said this time of year the family liked to eat outdoors, and they had a beautiful outdoor dining area overlooking the pool and the courtyard with the trees. The servants were setting up when I got there. I didn't see any of his family yet, but I'm sure they were going to come at any time now. Hernando Rojas came out with his lovely wife and introduced me as Gabriela. She was in her early 40s or mid-40s and very poised, spoke English almost as well as he did, just with a little bit heavier Mexican accent. They had 2 teenagers, a son around 16 and a daughter around 14. They also spoke some English. They welcomed me to Campeche and said hello to me and chatted a bit before we sat down to eat. The last arrival was the oldest daughter, Anna. She had a tomboyish air to her, was a very pretty young lady, though. She had just turned 21 in July and was entering her senior year at the University of Campeche, studying to become a high school history teacher. The servants began bringing out a feast which consisted of broiled seafood, some meats, I think mainly pork, fresh vegetables, sauces, lots of rice, even some cheese there. A little bit different diet than, say, the people in Mexico City would eat. Anna's younger brother asked me what religion I was. This got a grimaced look from his mother and father. I answered, Christian. He's from Católica. Even though I feared that my answer might be a deal killer, I said, no, Protestante, Methodista. Big smiles came to the faces of Senor and Senora Rojas. He exclaimed, oh, we have many professor friends and archaeologist clients who are Methodists. Do you know Southern Methodist University, Vanderbilt University, Emory University, and Duke University? They are some of our best clients. I answered, of course, Emory University is in Atlanta, where I live. And they said, oh, we've been in Atlanta. Senor Rojas chimed in, Los Methodistas son muy simpáticos y inteligentes, which means the Methodists are very nice and intelligent. Then Anna added in English, yes, we need to have married priests like the Methodists. Then we would not have all these pervert Catholic priests who are hurting the children. Her parents nodded in approval. Well, that was a far cry from the family of my girlfriend in Mexico City, Alicia. When her mother was in a good mood, she called me Diablo Protestante. For the remainder of the meal, the conversation focused mostly on me. They asked questions about my family, my background, my siblings, how many I had one, the history of our family, our ethnicity. They want to know what life was like in Atlanta. They then asked many questions about where I've been in Mexico. Anna asked me if I had a girlfriend in Atlanta, and I told her, honestly, no. I'd never had time in architecture school to keep a steady girlfriend. I'd have plenty of dates, but not time to keep the attention that a girl wanted to be the one man in her life. When given a signal by Senora Rojas, the servants came back into the dining area and cleared the table in preparation for dessert. For dessert, we had an incredible hanga, which is a deep-fried cheesecake wrapped in batter, topped with ice cream, whipped cream, chocolate sauce, and cherry and whipped cream. You name it. It was an incredible dessert. After everyone had finished the dessert, the teenagers got the signal it was time for them to leave, and they did. Then the servants brought out humidors of large cigars, which were offered to Hernando and me. I did not partake. Hernando did. And then the 2 ladies were offered little skinny cigars. Both the Senora and their daughter Anna took one. Anna started to light her cigarillo, then glanced at me, then put the cigarillo down and called one of the servants and asked her to bring her cigarettes from her bedroom. I don't know what that was all about. We got down to business. Senor Rojas first confirmed that I wanted to start the next morning. He said that he could take me on a 3-day tour of all the archaeological sites on my list at Sisbichnoc Mall for $200. That's the equivalent of $1,400 today. Colloch Mall was too far away and the road had washed out. I could afford that, barely, but would not have much money left over for touring Tabasco and Veracruz. This offer, though, was really not what he was proposing. As an alternative, he proposed that his daughter Anna take me to the archaeological sites in her Jeep. If I agreed to explain in detail the architecture of each city to Anna, my cost would be only her actual gasoline, food, and boarding expenses. He would pay her salary. I accepted the latter proposal, eventually costing me a grand total of $46. Rojas said, "Good, Anna will pick you up at 8:30 in the morning." Anna did not look terribly happy after hearing that last statement. Evidently, she had plans for the next day. There was a heated exchange in rapid Spanish. Then Armando suggested they discuss the matter elsewhere. Senora Rojas and I did our best to carry on a pleasant conversation in mixed Spanish and English. She explained that prior to marrying, she was Miss Campeche, and she'd also worked as a model both before and after marriage. She certainly looked like it. When Armando and Anna returned, he informed me that Anna would cancel her shopping trip to Merida with her friends and be delighted to be my guide. Anna was seated on her Jeep when I came out of the hotel at 8 the next morning. She curtly said, "Hurry up, let's go. I have a party tonight." That set the tone for much of the day. Most of the initial journey in the white Jeep varied between being awkward to being downright unpleasant. It was obvious that she did not want to be in the Jeep with me, but was doing it anyway for the sake of the father's business and her own need to polish her conversational English and learn more about Mayan architecture, of course. She spoke to me in always in curt, businesslike tones. Nevertheless, Anna became the first person to discuss the Chantal Mayas with me. I'd never heard of them. Neither Dr. Pina Chan nor my textbooks mentioned them. We drove first to Pacmol on the Gulf Coast. It was a formative period coastal village that was contemporary with the Olmec civilization. They were not Mayas and only built earthen mounds. It looks like the ones in the southeastern United States, actually. Then later, in the post-classic period, this village site was occupied by Chantal Mayas, who were not true Mayas either, but descended from people immigrated from farther south. Anna said that the real Mayas were afraid of the oceans and hurricanes. Most of the Maya cities were at least 32 kilometers or 20 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. The Chantal Mayas settled in the coastal zone and as a result became increasingly involved with regional trade. Their cargo boats plied the known waters of the Mesoamerican world. We next cut inland on a paved state highway heading to Edzna. It was only 14 feet wide, so anytime a produce truck or bus came by, Anna had to steer the Jeep almost a foot or so off the paving. I asked Anna about the stela at Uamel that portrayed a man with a large nose, beard, mustache, and conical hat. He was holding a rope connected to a lantern-shaped anchor. This was shown in the newspapers in Mexico City. Many scientists speculated that he was from an eastern Mediterranean Sea region, perhaps even a Phoenician. I told her that I had seen the article in the newspapers, but heard nothing about it since then, and the monument was not there at the archaeological site. She responded it was the policy of the government that no white man had been in Mexico before Cortez. No one knew where the monument was now. The archaeologists were not allowed to take it back to Tulane. As we got closer to Edzna, I tried to lighten things up by telling Anna about the time in Michoacan when 3 bulls charged me on a mountainside as I was taking photos of Lake Pascuaro. I jumped over a stone wall and landed in a mud puddle. She laughed for several seconds and never again displayed that super stern look on her face. To continue the stretch of humor, I asked, "Hey Anna, did you bring your cigars along?" Caught off guard, she blushed, quickly turned her head to smile at me and then said, "Oh, you're making fun of me because of last night. I didn't want you to think that I was an old-fashioned. I do like to smoke cigars when I'm drinking. how you say, alcoholic beverages? I didn't understand. What do you mean about being old-fashioned? Women smoking cigars is more like revolutionary. I once dated a Cuban girl from Miami who smoked those same little cigars. And I actually laughed. Oh no, there are many things you don't know about Mexico. Until 40 years ago, almost all upper middle-class Mexican women smoked cigars. The Indian women grew them their own tobacco and smoked pipes. The Maya women here in Campeche still do. Before Maximilian and the French came, the women smoked big cigars. However, the wives and the daughters of the French soldiers smoked little cigars, so the Mexican upper-class women copied them. Now we call them puros, franceses, or French cigars. My father does not know it, but my mother and I like even better to smoke those little cigars that are tobacco wrapped around marijuana. We call them panchavillas or cucarachas. The women of the revolution like to smoke marijuana. You know the song, La Cucaracha. It's about the revolution. We arrived at the intersection where we turned off to go to Edzna. There was just a small hand-painted wood sign that said Edzna and with an arrow pointing to the left. I said, this is a major archaeological zone? Eventually we arrived at Sierra de Bruja, or a hill of the witch. It marks the outer boundaries of the Edzna site. Not a whole lot to see back then, as you see, but we knew we were finally there. At Witch Hill, we turned off the paved highway to the entrance road to Edzna. Oh my gosh. This is the most accessible archaeological site in Campeche. It was barely a trail. We began seeing restored and partially restored ruins scattered through the trees. This must have been the suburbs of Edzna. At the edge of the restored Acropolis, there was a large Maya hut painted red. I noticed this was a pattern I would see elsewhere in Campeche back in 1970, was that in each place they built a large Maya hut to serve as the home of the caretaker. This is a contemporary satellite image of Edzna today. You will notice there are actually more trees growing within and at the edge of the restored archaeological zone than back in 1970. It really has not had that much care or archaeological activity. I don't know why. After we got out of the Jeep and started walking down the path to the largest buildings, Anna was suddenly much more pleasant, in the sense of a male buddy accompanying on a hike. Early in the day, while I was kidding Anna about liking to smoke skinny French cigars, I had mentioned that I had briefly dated a Cuban girl from Miami who was an art student at Emory University. Her name was Teresa Torres, and she also liked those skinny cigars. We had a very passionate dating relationship, actually my first passionate relationship, if you get my gist. But unfortunately, just before Christmas, she was arrested for destroying federal property in an anti-Vietnam War demonstration. She went to prison, and I never saw her again. In the months just prior to me departing for Mexico, Teresa had sent me several letters and postcards trying to persuade me to be her paid bodyguard that summer while our parents were touring Europe for 2 months. That would have been a very interesting assignment, but I was committed to going to Mexico. Anna brought Teresa's name up again as we were walking along the path. She sensed there was more to Teresa than I'd let on. Well, for the next few days, the relationship between Anna and I was never going to be more than the travel guide and her client. Heck, we were not even on a date. If I even touched Anna, her father would probably have me beheaded. So I answered the questions very frankly, like she was one of my fraternity brothers. Then it got really weird. She started asking me very intimate questions about Teresa, things like that a tour guide should never mention. How it felt to do this and that, if you get my gist. I answered frankly, but was delighted when our arrival in the main plaza would enable me to change the subject. Edzna means house of the Itzes. Of course, the Itzes, the same branch of the Mayas who would much later would settle in Georgia and become some of the ancestors of the Creeks. The site was occupied as early as 600 BC, but it really didn't become a major town until around 200 AD. It continued to be occupied until around 1500 AD when a smallpox plague struck the Yucatan Peninsula. Then and today, what one sees really are the largest partially restored pyramids that encircle a large plaza. themselves surrounded by shorter buildings that seem to have been the homes of the priests or the nobility. I've created a 3D computer model of the central part of Edzna so viewers could better understand the appearance of the city at its peak size. Notice that there were bright colors of stucco painted over the bland stucco and then the rock work. People cannot visualize this generally when they come to the site. Here's a closer view of that same drawing. The detail where they built an earthen ramp for the construction workers to haul the materials up to the temple that's under construction. Here's an even closer detail where you can see the masonry being finished, the stucco being applied, and then on the right how the building appears today with the stucco not reapplied to the restored building. The site plan prepared by the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia in Mexico shows the portion of Edzna that has been restored. What you can really see clearly, though, is the upper Acropolis, or the greater Acropolis, which is being focused on now. This is the Temple of 5 Stories, which is the largest pyramid in Edzna. It's quite similar to the Temple of the Niches in El Tajín, which is a Totonac city in northern Veracruz. This is the cone atop the temple. On the pyramid of 5 stories, it would have been covered in masts, most of which do no longer remain. This is the Temple of the Moon at Edzna. I got to see it in a manner that you will never get to see it. It had just been restored when I arrived. There was still some workmen finishing up touches, but notice that the roof is thatch. That thatch is now gone, but it's known definitely that the temple never had a stone roof. It was always a timber and thatch roof. Here's another view of it from the Temple of the 5 Stories. Get a better feeling, but notice how much less vegetation was there in 1970. The grassy knolls that you see here to the south of the Pyramid of the Moon in 1970 now have been restored to the original appearance of those pyramids. That's a major change that I've seen. Otherwise, not a whole lot's been done at Edzna. This is the Pyramid of the North that was immediately opposite the Moon Temple Pyramid across the main plaza. This is a small pyramidal temple facing the main plaza at Edzna. It was still under construction when I was there. You see the rear is still a pile of rubble. This is the ball court in Edzna. It's not a large one. I don't think the Mesoamerican ball game was quite as popular here as perhaps other cities. Here you will see 2 buildings that are being excavated by archaeologists and being restored by historic preservation architects on the south end of Edzna. That part of Edzna looks entirely different today than when I visited. I noticed the buildings have been restored to their original appearance, minus the stucco. This image is a composite of 3 slides. On the left is the view from the temple on the top of the Pyramid of the 5 Stories. In the center, you see a cross section between 2 different periods of construction on that same temple. And on the right are some emblems and masks that were found on the side of the Temple of the Mask. This is the Temple of the South as it appeared in 1970. You can see how so many of these Maya ruins actually appear to be natural hills until the trees are moved away. This is another view from the temple atop the Pyramid of the 5 Stories. What appears to be tropical forest actually covers dense urban ruins. It's hard to believe what's under there until you strip the trees away. In that era, this was the only place to buy lunch for many, many, many miles in any direction. So that's where we had to eat. It was okay, just tacos and other snacks. Throughout the 2,000 plus years that the Edzna site was occupied, it maintained an austere type of architecture, far more austere than most parts of the Maya civilization. But we're now going to Hobo, Around Hobo are about 7 or 8 city sites that exhibit the most elaborate architecture ever produced in the Americas. Beautiful buildings, extremely ornate stonework. They also lasted around 2,000 years. Now this is a modern 2-lane state highway. You would never know it was that way in the past. This is downtown Hobo, somewhere in the heart of Campeche. I had no clue where I was. The only paved streets were downtown and the highways leading to downtown. Once you got into the residential streets, you encountered block after block of sand roads defined by ancient stone walls. It should be emphasized that I knew absolutely nothing about the Maya archaeological sites around Hobo when I visited them. There were no signs, no tour guides, no printed guides. Most sites merely had a Maya house where the caretaker families lived. A guidebook to Maya cities by my sponsor, the Instituto Nacional de Antropología Historia. None of the archaeological sites near Hobo were even mentioned. You would not know they even existed. In addition, very little restoration work had been done to the ruins. Most of these towns became inhabited, or at least clearly inhabited, by the year 300 AD, when the first settlers settled on a hill 30 meters high near Hochob, which they modified to level to build their homes, and later would raise their most important constructions, such as public and religious buildings. Gradually, the cities were growing over several centuries. The slopes of the hills were occupied by terraces and platforms of houses with walls and roofs of perishable materials, such as thatch. Several pre-Hispanic cisterns or well openings have been located in these sites. They were also used for storage and distribution of rainwater to both the residents of the towns and to farmers. Hochob may have depended on Sisbichnoc or the Santa Rosa's Atampak, cities that already acquired regional importance in the Classic period. The buildings that stand today were built between 600 and 900 AD, but the greatest splendor of the political, social, and architectural creations was between the years 850 and 1000. This is when most of the Maya cities of the south were collapsing or actually abandoned. This prosperity was interrupted by the Mayan collapse that began around 800 AD and reached several cities in the Yucatan Peninsula by that time, causing the towns around Hobo to also lose power. In addition, the population began to migrate in search of better lands to form new settlements with less subjugation from under the direction of a king. However, the strategic place would not be completely abandoned, since it remained inhabited until sometime after the Spanish conquest. And I then took a state highway that looked more like a dirt trail southward to the spectacular city site of Sisbichnoc, which means painted vault in the Yucatec Maya language. This city was built in a Chinese architectural style and is located in the modern Mexican town of Iturbide. Parts of the site are now buried under the sprawl of the town, with the current area now confined to about 1 kilometer square, as shown here, and within there are 2 groups of structures, along with some outlying smaller groups. The 2 stelae that have been recovered from the site so far have readable dates of 731 AD and a fragment of another within the year 764 AD. It should be added, though, that most of these sites near Hobo have no dates on them, or they're not readable, and there are very few stelae at any of these city sites. This detailed photograph of a corner of a building in the city, you get a better feeling of the extreme detail that went into building these structures. Each one of those are separate stones that had to be hand carved and had to match perfectly. Then we come to a simple building that seems to belong elsewhere in Mexico, perhaps central Mexico. It's not quite the style that you see elsewhere in that Chilcotin area. The final city that I visited that day was Hobo. Only one building been restored, and only partially, but you can see the incredible detail, decorative pattern on that one building. An enormous amount of work went into this project. As we pulled out of Hobo, Anna reached into her pocketbook and pulled out a Xeroxed map. And then she began to turning off the main road to another dirt road to another dirt road. I became completely and totally disoriented, even worse than I was before. I had no idea where it was. She announced that she was late for her beach party, but she had a surprise for me. I was going to get to spend a night in a real Maya house and eat dinner with a real Maya family. They were preparing a feast for me for that evening, and she thought I'd have a grand time. She said she would pick me up at around 8:30 the next morning. As we turned into a cluster of old Maya houses, I asked, I said, "You mean you're driving all the way to the Gulf Coast this evening and then coming back in the morning?" She said, "Yes, that's what we're doing." Anna added, "And it only costs you 10 pesos, both for the meal and staying in the hut tonight." Back then, that was the equivalent of about $2. A Maya woman came out of the front hut, maybe middle to late 30s. She asked for her money. Then she motioned for me to follow around to the back of her house, where I came to the guest hut. It was the same construction as her house, only smaller. My hostess smiled when Anna turned around and started walking to the Jeep. I don't know why, but then soon I noticed I was going to be sharing the area of the house with a nice flock of turkeys and chickens. Oh boy. I had some time to kill, so I walked around the Maya farmstead, paying particular note to how they grew their vegetables. I then measured my Maya cabin and sketched it in my daily journal with notes of how they built Maya houses. So it was time well spent. I then peeked into the main house and watched the ladies cooking for a while. It was interesting, preparing the meal. She pointed over to her daughter in another corner of the house who was doing something. I wasn't sure what she was making. Maybe it was something with chocolate. And the girl announced in Spanish that she was 16 years old. And evidently that was a big deal. I didn't get the significance until later on in the evening. This is not a photograph from the house, but it does give an indication of the many varieties of fruits and vegetables that are served in a typical Maya meal. It's very nutritious, really. I was surprised to see that something very similar to the traditional Brunswick stew of the Creek Indians was the staple of the Maya diet. Obviously, that's where the dish came from. We were having a feast this afternoon, though, so they cooked a young pig in hot coals underground, which would be the main meat. There seemed to be some other meats included in the banquet plans. Tamales are a staple in the diet of all of the indigenous Americas of southern Mexico, not just the Mayas. They consist of a corn batter wrapped in corn husk. The batter is mixed with beans or nuts or fruit or meat of different flavors. The dinner was delicious. They did not use the hot peppers nearly as much as you see in the dishes in central Mexico, which is a bonus for me, but there's no doubt about the food being very helpful. I wasn't so rude as to take pictures while we were eating, so I'm using photographs online to give you an idea of what these foods looked like. Things, though, got weird after dinner. First, the lady told me in Spanish that I was going to be spending the night in a different cabin. It was located at the back of the farmstead, rather isolated, but it was better built and had some sort of a plywood door to keep security. The reason she gave was that it had a private bathroom. This is the bathroom, by the way, so I would not have to share with the rest of her family. That made sense, but then we started going downhill from there. I moved my backpack and camera bag to the new cabin. I barely had time to relieve myself and walk back to the new house when the lady appeared again. I think she said it is time to make your choice or make a decision. Then she signaled with her hand and her 3 daughters showed up behind her. She announced that the 16-year-old daughter would cost 24 pesos, that's $2 back then, for the night, and the 13-year-old was 12 pesos, or $1, for a total of 36 pesos for both girls. The same thing that she charged for the room and board. She then pointed to the pre-adolescent daughter, who I guess was like 11, I don't know, and told me that she would be just another 10 pesos for all three. The two girls were so much shorter than me that they looked like little children. I was grossed out. Of course, the third girl was a child, because just 2 days earlier we'd watched the Merida police in Yucatan abduct a 16-year-old beauty queen from the hotel and sell her to the boss hog from Texas. This is beyond the pale for me. I was totally unfamiliar with the sex industry at that time and very naive. After I said no gracias, the mother and the 6-year-old girl became very angry and called me a duck, or they said pato, several times. Yes, 36 pesos was a lot of money to the teenage girl, but I didn't back down. I told her that Ana was my novia, serious girlfriend or fiancé. The mother demanded I pay her anyway. I said no. She then went and got another woman who perhaps was her mother, or maybe the boss of the operation, I don't know. But she had a very mean look to her. She told me that woman who brought you is not your novia. If she was your novia, she would have slept with you last night. What good is a woman if she does not sleep with her man? She's not your novia. I responded angrily, no quiero a tu house, y no voy a pagar un peso más por dormir en esta casa sucia. That means I do not want your daughters and will not pay you a single peso more to sleep in this dirty house. The old woman responded, Vete al infierno. That means go to hell. Her daughter, I guess it's her daughter, and her granddaughter repeatedly said, Pato, 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 pato. And then they walked away cussing in some language. I was not sure whether it was Spanish or Mayan. Well, the sun was setting, so I went into the hut to figure out some way to barricade the plywood door, if you call it a door. I found a trunk there and some rope and some other items I piled against the door so it would be not completely easy to knock the door through and come and get me with their knives or machetes. I didn't know what was going to happen during the night. I did not sleep well that night. I was on the edge. I heard animals off in the distance, sound like coyotes or something, and I knew that I had no idea where I was. I had no idea where Anna was. I didn't have no idea how to get out of there. During the night, I had this recurring nightmare that a mob of angry women carrying daggers and machetes were coming in and they chopped me to pieces. But somehow that did not happen. I woke in the morning, the sunshine, and all was quiet. I was supposed to get a full-blown Maya breakfast, but obviously the locals were really ticked off at me. All I saw on the dining table underneath the shed was a bowl of the tamales left over from the night before. A raven was pecking on them. A bowl of fruit and a basin filled with cans of Dos Equis cerveza, that's beer. I gathered 3 or 4 pieces of fruit and washed it under the spigot. As much as I dislike beer, I grabbed one of the cans of beer. It was the only thing sanitary around there I could drink. Went back to my hut and sat on top of the chest, ate my breakfast, and waited for Anna. Anna was not there at 8:30 as promised. I waited and I waited and I waited. Finally, it was 9:30 and she still hadn't showed up. I waited about 15 minutes more, put on my Instituto Nacional de Antropología Historia ID tag, and walked out to the dirt state highway, hoping that I could flag down a policeman to get directions back to Hobo Chin and I could understand his Spanish. That did not occur, but something better happened. A white pickup belonging to the INAH came by. He noticed my tag when I flagged him down. He told me that there was one bus a day that came to Hobo Chin from Campeche City and arrived at around 12 and then left at 12:30 to go back to Campeche. That was my only chance of getting back to Campeche City. So I walked back to the farmstead compound, but this time I stayed in the first house where Anna had dropped me off. thinking perhaps I'd be more likely to see her than if I was at the back of the property. I didn't want to miss her. But Anna never came. Anna! Anna, ¿dónde estás? Where are you, my beautiful señorita? It's getting late. I have to leave at 11 to walk to town to catch the bus. Anna! Anna! Anna, where are you? God help. Anna, please show up. My gosh. Is she doing a number on me where I'm going to be stuck out here in the middle of nowhere?